You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. Hey guys, back with another Fallout 4 video, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about why we haven't seen a Game of the Year, Ultimate, or Definitive Edition of Fallout 4 yet. Overall, the entire situation is a bit odd, since Bethesda does have a tendency to release an edition of their games that includes all of the DLC within a short period of the game's final DLC coming out. So today, I'll be going over how previous Bethesda games released their Game of the Year or Ultimate Editions. I'll talk about why we haven't gotten a Game of the Year edition yet, and I'll also discuss where Fallout 4 VR fits into the mix, and whether it's actually the Game of the Year edition or not. So I guess without further ado, let's begin. As I just said, almost every previous Bethesda Game Studios game has received a Game of the Year edition of some sort. The Elder Scrolls Morrowind, Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and Fallout 3 all have Game of the Year editions. And in a certain sense, Fallout New Vegas also has a quasi-Game of the Year or Definitive Edition called the Ultimate Edition. And Skyrim has the Legendary Edition that was released on PS3 and Xbox 360, as well as the recently released Special Edition, which is on PS4 and Xbox One. Typically, a Game of the Year edition for all of these games releases within about a year of the game's release. However, later games like Fallout New Vegas and Elder Scrolls Skyrim have a Game of the Year or Ultimate Edition come out much later. Fallout New Vegas is released in late 2010, and its Ultimate Edition came out in early 2012. The Elder Scrolls Skyrim came out in late 2011, and its Legendary Edition was released in mid-2013 before the Xbox One and PS4 came out. Something that's worth pointing out is that the Game of the Year or definitive version of each of these game releases within a reasonable time window. In other words, there is a period of about 5 or 6 months between the release of the final DLC and the release of a definitive edition of a game. Fallout 4's last DLC released in late August of 2016, and that means a definitive edition of Fallout 4 should have been released earlier this year if it were to follow Bethesda's previous trends. The question though is, why haven't we gotten a Game of the Year or Ultimate Edition yet? Well, perhaps one of the more or less obvious reasons is because of Skyrim Special Edition. Since Fallout 4 released in November 2015, a perfect time to have released the Game of the Year edition of Fallout 4 would have been fall or holiday 2016. After all of the DLC was complete, and it probably would have been simple enough to print more Fallout 4 discs and include a code for Fallout 4's DLC for both PS4 and Xbox One, and have it all ready for release within about 2 to 3 months after Nuka World came out. However, the decision to release Skyrim Special Edition is a reason why we haven't seen a Game of the Year edition for Fallout 4. Imagine the following scenario for a moment. You've played both Fallout 4 and Skyrim, and Bethesda decides to re-release both games around the same time for about $60 each. Given that Fallout 4 is already on the platform that you own, which one are you going to buy? By forcing the buyer to choose between both of these games, Bethesda would be cannibalizing their own potential sales. And since Skyrim wasn't previously released on PS4 and Xbox One, there's also the likelihood that Fallout 4 might lose out on a lot of sales. And since The Elder Scrolls tends to be a much more popular series overall, that may also contribute to even lower sales for Fallout 4 Game of the Year or Ultimate Edition as well. There's also the mystery known as Fallout 4 VR, which is going to be released later this year. To release a Fallout 4 Game of the Year edition and then release Fallout 4 VR around the same time as separate products would confuse the ever-living heck out of people. Perhaps you and I would be able to distinguish between the two, but imagine if you don't play video games and you're buying someone Fallout 4 as a gift. By having two different but similar looking versions, you may end up getting the wrong one if you guess. With this said though, let's discuss Fallout 4 VR later. Now, I do think that Fallout 4 could or may eventually get either a Game of the Year or Ultimate Edition at some point. The only question is when. Now, we know that Bethesda is going to be at E3 this year, and there's a good chance that they will announce a Game of the Year edition that included the base game and all of its DLC, either on one disc for console players or as a separate code for console players. I would think that if they announced it at E3, we may end up having a Game of the Year edition before fall of this year. That said, there's also Fallout 4 VR to consider. As I previously mentioned, it seems really unlikely that Bethesda would release both a Fallout 4 Definitive or Game of the Year edition in conjunction with Fallout 4 VR. This would confuse the heck out of people, especially if Fallout 4 VR ends up being a multi-platform release, which it's looking like it will at least be on PC and Xbox One, and perhaps it'll come out to PlayStation 4 Pro later on. So I would say if we don't see a Game of the Year edition within the next 2 to 3 months, I'd go out on a limb and say we aren't going to see one until sometime after Fallout 4 VR comes out. This would mean we would be seeing the Fallout 4 Game of the Year edition sometime in 2018, which would be almost 3 years after the game's original release. And if that's the case, that might be a hard sell for people, especially if the next Fallout game comes out around the same time. However, Skyrim Special Edition sold pretty well, so maybe Fallout 4 Game of the Year Edition would sell okay. Now, there's a possibility that Fallout 4 VR could be Fallout 4's Game of the Year Edition. Perhaps like Resident Evil 7 is for PlayStation VR, we're going to be getting a version of the game that has a virtual reality mode as a bonus rather than an absolute requirement. Otherwise, if you absolutely had to have a headset to play Fallout 4 VR, you're limiting your potential sales as there's a good chance many people don't own a VR headset. This is speculation on my part, but Fallout 4 VR may actually allow you to use a regular controller, like the original game does, and have the VR headset function as an alternative way to control the in-game camera. So you could look around in the game world by moving your head, but if you actually wanted to walk in a certain direction or aim, you would have to move the right control stick and then press forward on the left control stick. We sort of have a vague idea that Fallout 4 VR, or whatever the heck it's going to be called, is going to be available for Xbox Scorpio. Now, I'll link the video in the description since I don't want to get Content ID claimed, but if you watch the Xbox Scorpio announcement video, around 2 minutes and 2 seconds, Todd Howard specifically says, and I quote, "We're moving Fallout 4 to VR, and to have a console that can support that at the resolution and speed that we really want, I think it's going to be magical." It seems unlikely to me that Bethesda wouldn't allow you to play Fallout 4 VR with a regular controller, especially on Xbox Scorpio, where a controller is the primary way to play your games. And since there are games like Resident Evil 7, which have both VR and non-VR modes, maybe there's a possibility that we may get a version of Fallout 4 that allows you to play both ways. This idea may not actually be that far-fetched when you consider that when GTA 5 originally released on Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3, there was no FPS mode. In fact, one of the appealing reasons to repurchase Grand Theft Auto 5 for PS4 and Xbox One was the ability to play the game in first-person mode. And in a certain sense, perhaps Fallout 4 VR is a lot like that, except you're just going to need a VR headset for the additional functionality. But if you don't have a VR headset, you can still get a version of the game that contains all the extras and allows you to play it like you would normally. In fact, it may actually be an upgraded version of Fallout 4 with better stability, since VR games usually require 60 FPS at minimum and 90 FPS at the ideal. Otherwise, you're getting motion sickness. For a company as big as Bethesda is, what seems to make the most sense in this case is to release a version of Fallout 4 that's compatible with the vast majority of VR headsets and other gaming platforms on the market. In other words, we should be getting something that's compatible with the Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and the PlayStation VR. Perhaps Microsoft will also add their own VR headset into the mix as well, or Scorpio will just have support for either the Oculus Rift or the HTC Vive. But at the end of the day, the most likely scenario is that Fallout 4 VR will be compatible with most headsets on the market. Otherwise, if Bethesda limits themselves to just one type of headset, it significantly reduces the amount of people that can potentially buy and play Fallout 4 VR. At the end of the day, we're not going to really know until E3, but I see one of three scenarios happening. The first is that Fallout 4 Game of the Year or Fallout 4 Ultimate Edition is going to be released in either May or July of this year. That way, it comes out before Fallout 4 VR does. The second option is that Fallout 4 Game of the Year or Fallout 4 Ultimate Edition comes out after Fallout 4 VR does this fall and ultimately comes out sometime in 2018. The third and final scenario is that Fallout 4 VR is actually Fallout 4 Game of the Year or Fallout 4 Ultimate Edition and has virtual reality mode added as a bonus. In other words, you can choose between whether you're playing a VR version of Fallout 4 or you're playing the regular Fallout 4 experience without a VR headset. And of the three, I'd like to think that the latter scenario, where Fallout 4 VR and Fallout 4 Game of the Year are essentially the same thing, is what's going to happen. Or what may end up happening is Fallout 4 VR comes out, and then Fallout 4 Game of the Year or Ultimate Edition comes out the following year at some point. I'd say even if Fallout 4 VR fails, people will still want a version of Fallout 4 that includes all of the DLC content on disc for consoles. After all, Fallout 4's $50 Season Pass does make purchasing the downloadable content cost almost as much as a brand new game, and by having the Fallout 4 Game of the Year edition cost $60 for the first month, and then have it drop down to $40 or so in the following months, may be an attractive offer for a lot of people that want to experience the add-on content. I guess we'll just see what the future holds. Alright guys, that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, click the bell to join the notification squad, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.